Hi, Secret Bits. This is Oliver from Germany. And yes, I have a little presentation for you guys. Um, and I would just start with a little bit of myself. And yeah, quite easy. I'm from Germany and working with SQL Server since ages. I'm leading the German data platform community. I'm a Microsoft Data Platform MVP. I'm doing a lot of stuff in terms of training and a lot of stuff in terms of architecture and so on. And one of my favorite things is the common data model. So now, if you don't know what a common data model is and what it is all about and why it is the best buddy for governance, data governance, maybe you should just join my session here and have a look to what I have to present. And yeah, maybe it's of interest for you. I'll be happy. So first of all, common data model, our new buddy for data governance. Hey, my friends, what does this mean? Yep, I'm doing a lot of stuff in terms of data quality, in terms of how to build systems that have better data available, better ways of managing data, etc., etc. And I'm most of the times I'm coming to scenarios where I found something like this, an all-time governance problem, and how it looks like. Okay, most of the time I'm working for companies with quite a big landscape of different IT systems. Like for example, on the one side they have an ERP system, maybe from SAP. On the other side, they maybe have a CRM system or something like this from Microsoft, and in the middle, they maybe do web analytics, etc., with Adobe. And yeah, all of these things come together because all of these systems have different views to data, different structures. And this points out into the problem that most of the companies have that I'm working for. Because they have these different software vendors. And of course, these systems are focusing on different abilities to solve data, to work with data, etc., etc. So maybe there's a help desk system, maybe there's a CRM system or an ERP system. Maybe all of them have customers and manage customers, but all of them have different schemas. So maybe the CRM system has whatever kind of attributes in the system for storing the customer, and maybe the help desk has something completely different. So all of them have different schemas, as I said. All of them have different metadata. So sometimes, yeah, even they have a customer name. In one system, the customer name is whatever, 100 characters long. In the other one, it's 255 or something like this. So everything is always a little bit different depending on, of course, the software vendor. And the other thing is that, of course, also these systems have different, maybe, yeah, most of them have relational databases underneath, but the way of how they relate the data to each other, what kind of keys they are using, what kind of identifiers are relevant for certain lookups, that's always different. So they also have different relationships. Okay, then clever people came up with the idea, yes, we need to have a master data management system. And there are quite cool systems on the market that managing that so-called single point of truth, maybe the golden record about a customer. Yeah, so that every other system has to sync with this kind of master data system. Maybe they also take this into considerations when they are working on their data warehouse because they want to build a customer dimension. And the customer dimension has to be somehow equalized over all the different systems because maybe I'm doing a slice by an attribute of a dimension. And yes, that has to be somehow relevant and has to be somehow fed from these kind of systems that are the underlying transactional systems. So in this case, yes, we also try to standardize data in data warehouse processes, etc. But again, this really doesn't fix the root cause because still all these different vendors have different things going on, and we have a lot of effort to, let's say, work with this kind of different data sources and trying to standardize them. Of course, depending on how far you are with this, maybe already your master data system is quite well and you have everything in place, but maybe not. Maybe you are still at the start, or maybe you are just in a self-service BI project and you do not have anything on that. So at a certain stage in 2018, there was a quite interesting thing because there were three people on stage. And these three people, they just mentioned a complete new way of doing things together, which is quite astonishing because if you look at it, these people are not normally the obvious people that are working together, especially the guy on the right side, which unfortunately is not longer with that company. But anyhow, these people were very important guys. And what they said is they initiated the so-called Open Data Initiative. Wow, that sounds quite cool because what they try to do is they try to put things together. They put their different software systems that are doing different things together into something that they joined in a certain kind of format. And they call this the ODI format. And yeah, somebody like Bill McDermott at that time said, yes, we will support this open data initiative and we will help the businesses to run with a true single view on the customer. What does it mean? It means that they all try to somehow standardize their format so that people do not take into consideration what has to be done to match my customer record, for example, in SAP with the structure of the customer record in Microsoft CRM. Okay, I know you will think, yes, that's impossible. Yes, I'm totally with you. It is not the usual thing because most of the companies have their own ideas. They have their own, let's say, values. If the people who work with the software know how the system works, they can maybe earn a little bit more money on that. So yes, it could be a little bit tricky, but from my perspective, this was quite interesting because this is something where I think, whoa, if even they do this, this is already a first big step into a world where maybe governance and data management is a little bit easier. So now they put this kind of open data initiative, which of course was a little bit forced by Microsoft, into a kind of framework which I like to introduce to you and which I like to talk a little bit about it because Microsoft, and yes, we are talking about Microsoft technology on SQL Bits here. Microsoft did some quite interesting stuff with this. And this is something I think which is of interest for you guys. So they call this Open Data Initiative. But if you look a little bit underneath, you see, yes, there is one data model. Yeah, okay. One data model for systems like the Experience Platform from Adobe or the S/4HANA system or Microsoft Dynamics 365. But the more interesting thing for us is that stuff here, Microsoft Azure Data and AI. So this means that the whole open data initiative and everything that is created by these systems somehow leads into the Microsoft Azure environment, data and AI. Okay, what could this be? Let's have a look to this. Microsoft did a quite interesting move over the times, and when you read our good friend Christopher, Mr. Webb, at that time he was not at Microsoft, but now he is with Microsoft. But he made a quite interesting tweet in 2018. And I just recorded that because I found it so interesting. Because he said, hey, if you want to know something about anything in Power BI and the future of Power BI and the future of data analytics or something like this, look into this kind of document here. And interesting why is this document called Dynamic 365? Okay, normally nobody from us working with the data platform or working with data platform, of course, we definitely know Dynamics 365, but why is this interesting for us? Because yes, in this kind of area with Microsoft, a lot of changes happening and a lot of stuff happening under the knees of this kind of division. And this interesting thing here is that in this part, you will see that the business application part from Microsoft owns things like Power BI. They own things like Power Apps. Yes, of course, it's quite related to the business applications. But with Power Apps and the Common Data Service, they are somehow really, really near to what I'm trying to tell. So this means everything that happens here, all the movements, all this kind of code, all the initiative is running from the business applications. And so if you want to know what's going on here in this section, Chris is absolutely right saying, hey, you have to look into this. This has changed over the time. So for example, today in 2020, they splitted this up and now this kind of paper called Microsoft Power Platform. But again, in the Microsoft Power Platform, there's some really interesting stuff that is related to this open data initiative. And now have a look what this could be all about. So this thing is called Common Data Model. And the interesting thing about the Common Data Model is that Microsoft has taken a way of doing this kind of open data initiative in the way that they define a meta model for any kind of, let's say, business situation, any kind of domain that you're working with. So if you look on the graphics here, you will see there's things like core, there's things like CRM, there's things like sales, there's talent, etc. And each of this kind of domain has different kind of entities. And these entities and attributes and relationships, they represent the business concept and the activities of it. And of course, based it as it is with the Dynamics people, this is more driven to the, let's say, application thinking. So doing micro applications on this kind of common data model. But again, the common data model means that something like an account and the definition of an account is really something that is now, let's say, structured as a central meta entity for your business. And maybe SAP will talk to the same kind of format, hopefully. But the interesting thing is that this kind of meta system exists, and Microsoft is proposing this system. And even better, Microsoft is going like this, and Microsoft says, okay, we are now doing this in a kind of open source way because it's the open data initiative. So we are open-minded now, we are open source now, and we give that to the community. And that's exactly what Microsoft did. So Microsoft put this into GitHub and said, okay, our way of structuring this thing is really something that is now open source and everybody can work with it. So on the one side, we have the ISVs that maybe you are absolutely expert in healthcare business and you know how to structure it and you know how to structure the data. You can put efforts into this kind of common data model and try to implement parts of it. Yeah? Try to set up things like the best way of storing the healthcare information, of storing entities that are related to healthcare or something like this. So this is quite interesting. And again, as Microsoft put that on GitHub, everybody can use it. So everybody can add to it, etc. So what Microsoft built was this kind of common data model. And interesting wise, they had put this into something on the web, and I'm just trying to show it to you. So here we are. We are on GitHub, and we are in Microsoft CDM. So you will see that there are documentation, samples, etc., and there's a description of the common data model. So what Microsoft believes is under the common data model. And again, quite interesting, it is something, if you are working with Dynamics, if you are, let's say, somebody who works with Microsoft CRM or something like this, you will find things quite interesting, because what Microsoft offers here is a so-called visual entity navigator. So a system that gives you a kind of ability to see all the different entities in this CDM thing. And the interesting thing here is, again, that this is open source. You can jump on it. Yeah. So I just flipped over to this link, and maybe now I'm interested in what Microsoft has with the account. Yeah, you see it's Dynamics 365, so it's really related to it. But I can click on the account, and now what's happening? It's open up a browser, and the browser is showing the account, and it puts again something like, here we are with the account, and it shows the supporting entities, etc. And if I click on an account, it loads the information about the account, the structure, all the attributes of that account. It loads it into the browser. So now you see how Microsoft thinks on metadata in this kind of entity account. Yeah. So you will have things like whatever, create on. Okay, that's something not so interesting, but business type code, charity code, account number, revenue, number of employees. If you're working with Microsoft Dynamics, and especially with CRM, you would say, I know this kind of fields. Yes, a lot of stuff is coming from the Dynamics part. It's coming from CRM, the way how Microsoft has stored customer data in CRM itself. And of course, yes, you can say, I don't know if SAP will support this. Yes, of course. But this is something that Microsoft offers to the community, to the open source, and say, hey, you can work with this. Yeah? You can maybe also add additional things to it. Yeah? And we as Microsoft, we are working with this as well, of course. And now you can look into things like everything is defined here. If I look into something like the account number, you will have a quite nice description. So you have a display name, you have a description in terms of the metadata, what is in there. You have a data format as such. Is this attribute, for example, a primary key? Is this read-only? So a lot of things that you normally do when you're working with metadata, when you're working with a data catalog, when you're working with a master data system, that you now have the possibilities in terms of this kind of metadata structure to understand exactly how it looks like. Okay. So now, what Microsoft did as well is Microsoft put this into the product. So back again to the presentation, and yes, let's have a look. Microsoft built something around this common data model, or not around, more on top of it. Because what Microsoft has in mind was, if we have things like Dynamics, it's nice. We have in the normal, if you have software as a service, you have behind the scenes a database structure that is working, and you as a user, you do not have to take care with this database structure anymore. If you work on premise, for example, with a CRM system, yes, yeah, you had the SQL Server, and a lot of you people work with SQL Server and know the database structure, etc., etc. But Microsoft want to split this off. Microsoft, of course, maybe had a look to Salesforce when they do database.com or something like this and say, hey, what should we do in terms of having a database as a service? So not platform as a service, software as a service, in terms of you do not have to take care on anything else like the object itself, like the entities itself, etc., etc. And that's exactly what the Common Data Service is. The Common Data Service is really a kind of software as a service for databases where everything is already in. And of course, Microsoft put this into a kind of relationship where the target group is really something that the people like not working normally with databases can use. So, for example, Power BI, Power Apps, especially Power Apps, because with Power Apps you build this low-code, no-code applications. And Microsoft had the idea saying, okay, let's take this and put this underneath my Power Apps. And if I want to work, let's say, with an entity customer, I have this in my Common Data Service, because what the Common Data Service is doing, it's really taking the structure of the Common Data Model and puts it as a possibility to use in this kind of database structure. Okay, let's have a look how this really works. So the intention here is that Microsoft says, okay, in this Common Data Service, for all these different micro applications, we have a single system of record for our business data. So with the customer, we have that centrally in the CDS system implemented, and everybody can build applications on top of it. Source systems, maybe like SAP or maybe like Dynamics, can push data into this Common Data Service, and they can use this. So how does it look like? It looks like that you can do a lot of things with it. And that's the point where, from my personal opinion, it gets really interesting in terms of data governance. Because I'm now on a level where I cannot take care, or I do not have to take care on any kind of, let's say, database structures, etc., any kind of perform things. Maybe I have to take, but anyhow, I can use this just for building applications. And let's switch into this again. So I'm here in Power Apps. So that's my my Power App service. And you see I'm in a special environment here. And I'm looking into the entities of my Power App application. And underneath these entities is my Common Data Service. So I have an entity account. If I click onto the account, I see all the attributes that are related to this account. Anyhow, I think maybe we will find some of them that are in the Common Data Model. Yes, we will see a lot of them because they are so-called managed or standard. Yeah? So these things are coming from the Common Data Model. I can use them from the Common Data Model. Of course, I can also build my complete new entity by my own, because maybe some of the Common Data Model entities are not what I like, or maybe I have an entity that I want to use. Maybe I want to do something new. And that's exactly what I did. So I have something that is called country master data, because I thought maybe it's a good example to work on something like country master data, because there is a dimension I have in my reporting, or something where I centrally want to manage all my country master data. And this is something I could do. So I built this completely new. And you see here, it gets a little bit of a kind of alias up front. So it is a custom type. Yeah? So it is something that I have built in this common data model. Okay, and if we look into something like this, we see I have in my country master data, I have different fields in here. Like, for example, I have an area field, I've the name for the countries out of whatever different languages, maybe the kind of continent that is related to. And what I can do here is I can look into the data in this way that I can see it here in my environment. But much more interesting is something that I just want to show you, because if you ever worked with master data services on SQL Server, maybe this comes up familiar to you. I'm just downloading something that I can edit in Excel. So I'm open it up, open my Excel, and yeah, it takes some time to start with all the add-ins I have in here. But the interesting thing here is that it now takes the data from this kind of software as a service database, from this CDS, and loads it into my Excel. So now what I can do here via the connector, and it will authenticate myself. So also there is the possibilities of some kind of security on top of that. I will not go into deep in this way, but just to give you an idea what you can do. So for example, you have a data steward and he or she wants to work with this kind of information. And yes, you can do this. Now you can edit the stuff in your Excel spreadsheet in the way how you normally do this and do some silly things with it. Yeah? Or you can do things like, for example, you change a status. But hey, when you change the status, you see, oh, there's already some kind of lookup support in here. So I can build in this common data service, in this common data model, I can build this kind of lookup tables, etc., that maybe are important to have much better quality in the data, because I can structure it, I can pre-configure it, and I can also just build some stuff around this in terms of business rules, etc., etc., which is also something that you can do here in the common data services. I can take this and publish it. Yeah, I'm just build some stupid things in here. So I will not publish this, but just believe me, in this case, I can publish this, and now the data will be persisted in the common data service. So I have now a kind of database system that I, as maybe not a database specialist, can just work with. I can work with it on a transactional area with, for example, I can just take this into Excel and do mass updates and all these kind of things. But I am also able to work on this in a more applicational way. So if I do not have a master data management system, yeah, and I do not like to work with this in Excel, and I just want to say, hey, is there a possibility to do this with something more fancy, more user-friendly, yeah, and not something like entities and all this kind of stuff that maybe the data steward doesn't understand. I have the possibility to build an app on top of that kind of entities. Yeah. So in Power Apps, I have two types of applications, or with the portals, I have three. I have Canvas and model-driven apps. In my case here, I'm using the model-driven app. So the model-driven app itself is, yeah, a little bit more related to something like a web screen or something like a desktop or something like this, where a Canvas app, you can build much more flexible mobile applications and all these kind of things. But let's have a look into the master data management app I'm having here. So if I click into something like this, you get a page like this. So in this model-driven app, I have additional things like I can also export to Excel. I have a kind of menu screen, and I can search, for example, for my master data. So, for example, I can search for United, like United States. Yeah. So, for example, I find United States here. Yeah. And yeah, I have the name United States. And for example, I have a German country name like USA in here. Okay. So I would not like to have USA. I would like to have something like also United States of America in here. I'm saving that. So now this acts like a kind of master data management system. It has the data now stored in the CDS database. And now I just want to connect to this with other systems so that I have this kind of central information in here and this kind of, let's say, unique record in here. So what I'm doing is I'm switching to one of my favorite programs, Power BI Desktop. And you see in Power BI Desktop, I have this kind of country dimension in here. And yeah, this thing is still the country German flag. So I have all the titles here in Germany and it says USA. Now, this thing has a connector to the CDS. So if you go into here and you look into something like the different sources that you get from Microsoft in Power BI, you will see that you also get a common data service. Yeah? So in this, I used the common data service for that example. So if I refresh now and cross fingers, it should not say USA anymore. It should be something different. Yeah? So this is something I hopefully have changed now. Yes, here we go. Yeah. So you see, you can use this already as a kind of central database system where you can join this into your Power BI models, etc., etc. Okay. So now with this, jumping back to the presentation, you see you can build this kind of model-driven apps with it. You can use Excel, or I also have a sample here. As a little mobile application, you can work with this kind of stuff. But now, Microsoft did another move with this kind of common data model, common data service. Because on the one side, we had the common data service that you now know that, for example, for the applications, for the low-code, no-code applications like Power Apps, etc., etc. And you already saw that there is some kind of integration into something like the Power BI environment where I can just look into that service and get the data. But over the time, Microsoft also worked on the Power BI side. And what they did is something even also interesting, because the common data model and the structure of the common data model is something that they try to use, or they use in stuff that you also may know when you're working with Power BI. That's the Power BI data flow. And let's have a look into something like this. The Power BI data flow has itself, of course, also entities. And of course, these kind of entities could now be also things like based on the common data model. Now in my screenshot, you see the entity type is custom. But again, you can also use here the predefined entities of the common data model. And if you look into something like this, you will see that that Power BI itself has in the entities all these different things that you may know based on the way how you imported it into it. But you can also match that into other entities, like new entities, and these new entities can be built on the common data model. The even more interesting thing is, how does Microsoft store this kind of data in um, a storage? And what you can do as an enterprise user, you can say, okay, I can store the data of my data flow in a data lake. Microsoft does this for you automatically if you do not say explicitly where you would like to have it. But you can also store this in your own data lake. And now, when I'm looking into my Storage Explorer, I have opened it up a little bit for you to see exactly where Microsoft stores this stuff that I have just shown you. And you see that there is something. Here are my different folders where all the entities that I load from the data flow into Power BI, they are in some kind of folders in here. And if you click onto a folder, like for example, for sales orders, come on, you will find that Microsoft is storing the data in a kind of CSV format in these folders. And this format is standardized because also the way of how the common data model is storing the information on the lake, this is something that is also used by Power BI. So you have something like a model JSON where you get all this kind of metadata information that is relevant for the description of the model is all in there. Now they evolved that, for example. Now Power BI stores it still in the model JSON, but there's also some kind of more advanced things going on, like that you have a little bit more flexibilities of storing it. But Power BI is still storing it as a model JSON in here. But this gives you much more opportunities because this means that Microsoft now uses something in the analytical approach where you can build your own entities for things like your data flows or for something that you want to analyze in the same kind of structure and format than the common data model as it is defined. And this, of course, brings you to the point that both areas are using a similar kind of structure. They are still somehow not connected to each other at that stage, but they are using the same kind of thing. And of course, if you know underneath how everything works, all the Power BI data flows are just CSV files with this kind of model JSON or with this manifest. And also other systems could read it because it's open. It's something not somehow proprietary for Microsoft itself. So now, if we put this together, we can say we have standardized metadata with the CDM. We have a data service that is based on this kind of metadata model or uses the metadata model, which is CDS. We have low-code, no-code applications that can work with this. And now we also have an analytic data repository that is using this type of meta model and persisted. And for me, this really sounds like a real cool idea and something that I really like, because from this kind of governance perspective, I think there's a lot of potential in here to use this. But it's getting better. It's getting even better. Why? Because what is the problem that in a lot of companies we will face with this kind of self-service initiatives in the BI environment? Of course, the problem of silo applications, because a lot of people will use Power BI just in their department. They will work on something on their own. They will have their own transformations, etc., etc., etc. And the data governor will say, oh, this will be something very, very tricky. Now, what the IT could say is that, hey guys, what would it be when I would deliver the enterprise data you normally take with Power BI, build data flows on top of this, get it out of the system? What would it mean if I would deliver you this thing in already a kind of format that you can use in Power BI? Somehow maintain best quality because I can run all my professional data functionality on top of that. And you get all this stuff at your fingertips just as a data flow, for example. That would be cool. And this is something that exists because um, we can use this CDM structure on enterprise level. Of course, we already use the data lake for it. And if you remember the ODI slide at the start of the presentation, underneath it says Azure Data and AI. And of course, yes, we are using this now. So this means Microsoft has in mind that every application of Microsoft, no matter if it's a business application, no matter if it's a self-service analytical application like Power BI, but also on the right side, having professional IT applications like, for example, the Azure Data Factory, Azure Databricks, or the new Azure Synapse, for example, or Azure Synapse Analytics, or Azure ML, all use or can read from the Azure Data Lake. And if we give these applications the ability to read and write with the CDM structure, so with the same structure that, for example, a data flow is written by Power BI into the lake, that would be a great thing because now we have the possibility to write in the format that the self-service people can read immediately. And this on a standardized metadata model. Woohoo! This would be something I think which is really great. And this is exactly happening. So all these different applications have the possibility to do this. And there's a lot of things going on in the ISV environment. So companies like Informatica or my own like OH22, we are working on systems that can read and write the CDM stuff. Yeah? And this is something that, from my personal opinion, is a real good strategy to get into a place where we have this kind of standardized metadata and not so many problems in terms of reading the data and understanding, oh, what kind of schema do we have? So 3 examples here, just short, because you could maybe take one of this example and talk an hour on that. Left side, we have something like the Spark CDM connector. And with the Spark CDM connector, I can load a jar library into my Spark pool in Synapse Analytics or in my Azure Databricks cluster. And I can use this library to read and write data in this kind of CDM format. Yeah? So I can even read a data flow that is written into the data lake immediately with my Databricks. But I can also take this and write it into a data lake, and I can use this in my data flow. It will be an external data flow, so you cannot edit it, but the external data flow is now able to be implemented into different kind of data models, data sets in your Power BI environment. I can also do things like, and this is something that Jovan sent me, a cool SQL on demand script where he took the format of the standardized format of CDM and just reads it with a SQL on demand T-SQL query. And you can take that T-SQL query, store it as a view, and with this, you immediately have a view in your Azure Synapse Analytic database in your SQL on demand. And maybe just look onto something like my country master data that sits there in the data lake. And to bring this even better, you can also use the orchestration and ingest tool that we have in our data platform. You can use the Azure Data Factory or the pipelines in Azure Synapse Analytics to read and write also the common data model. So there are some kind of settings. You only get that in the inline data source of a data flow at the moment. But you can take this and write with the Azure Data Lake, with the Azure Data Factory into the data lake and write this in the same format that you can read this with Power BI, or maybe then with SQL on demand, because you have only all these kind of metadata available in your system, which I think is a really cool stuff. There's still a lot of things to do. There are a lot of hiccups. But if you work with this, you will get some bloody noses with the formats and so on. So it's not as user-friendly as I would expect this, but the people are really working on it. And if you look at the GitHub, for example, on the Spark CDM connector, you will see that there's a lot of stuff going on to make it easier, etc., etc. Yeah? So keep this in mind. We now have the professional version of the, let's say, the common data model that we are using, that we can write this with our professional tools quite easily. Something just as a short thing, we also build this as a company. We also build an integration service component, because as it is open source, we know how to write the CDM destination. And so we can have the possibility to take this into our integration service component and just have a destination in our integration service that we can use. We, of course, use this also on the purpose in our product Cat.io, because we do their domain cleansing, etc., etc. And we thought it's a good idea to put this into a standard format on the data lake so that everybody can use the clean data as an IT pro. We can also use this thing as well in the way how we can work with things on-prem and then save it into the cloud in the data lake. Okay, so to the end, there's only just, let's say, maybe something missing. Maybe you think of something like this. Because I showed you the common data service. I showed you that we are able to consume on the analytical side via the data flows in Power BI, via the professional tools that now can read and write this kind of data, this kind of CDM format. But one thing that was a little bit missing is, yes, I used a connector from Power BI to get the data from the common data service. The problem here was that this data is still in the common data service database. It's not in the lake. And it's, of course, a little bit clumsy because it's a special connector. It's somehow not very easy to take, or even something you only can do with Power BI. So now what Microsoft did, quite interesting, is there is a little kind of service that you can trigger out of the common data service that writes the entities automatically into the Azure Data Lake. So kind of replication, so to say, from the common data service into the Azure Data Lake. Quite interesting. You can use this, you can trigger this, you can just configure it quite easily in terms of what you select, in terms of the storage account, the subscription where you push this in, and then you can automatically push the entities, all the changes of the entities in the data lake, and of course in the common data format. So you have all the definitions that you can now read this back from your IT Pro applications. Okay. Um, yeah, I like it. It's okay. Of course, it is still something, let's say, black box application service that is running in the background. Personally, I would more love to say, hey, if I have the CDS, can I tell the CDS that it is writing it directly without some kind of replication modeling to this? But technically, this is not yet implemented, or maybe will not be implemented. I don't know. But yeah, I would find it a little bit more easier. But in addition to this, and now a little bit easier than the connector I have with Power BI, is this kind of common data service is now even more open for people who work in the data platform and are not really happy with, let's say, fancy Power Apps or a web front end or something like this. And maybe they also have a completely different application that doesn't connect to something like the CDS service, but they really would like to get the data out of this thing. Maybe they built this kind of master data system. And for these people, and that's the last bit I show, you have something quite interesting because, and now I'm switching to something that is really cool. You have something like now a SQL connector. So you can connect to this CDS database via a special port, but you see all the entities in your CDS in that specific environment. You see that read-only, but you see that as normal SQL tables. Yeah, so you can work with this, and you can just write a select statement to this. And oops, the connection is gone. You can connect to this again. Just trying to refresh this maybe again. Let's have a look why this didn't work. Okay, here we are. So this is my dynamics. I will connect to this and hopefully I get back to it. Yes, here we are. And now let's go hopefully again to it. And now you can read this stuff out of the same thing that I used in my model-driven app. And you will find the same fields in here if you go through all the auditing stuff here, but you will see later on here on that side, you will things like the name, you will see all the stuff that I have in my model. That means now even if this is not the kind of direct sync I maybe want to have from CDS into the data lake, but I now have an application, I have now an interface open that is really common ground in terms of data selection. So I can use this with my SQL Management Studio, whatever kind of third-party application I have, a Toad or something like this. I can just use it and can query the data. Maybe also with a different ETL tool or something like this. I don't even bother with this, and I can use this as a central system. So with this, we see that with a common data model, yes, we can connect now to the CDS also as a data source. And with this, I think it is a quite interesting piece of infrastructure of service that Microsoft offers. So first of all, hopefully all these big companies get onto a common ground, and this kind of initiative really exists longer than, for example, maybe other stuff that people try to coordinate together. That would be quite cool. Microsoft's strategy in terms of having this for the low-code, no-code applications as a data repository, completely managed without any headaches from the DBAs, also quite nice. Of course, from a data quality perspective, you can build here all these cool things for maybe your central data management. And then on the other side, you can take the professional IT applications and push it to the people who are using it with a data flow or maybe with something else. Everything that can read a CDM thing is now a potential user of that data. With this, I hope this kind of short introduction was quite interesting for you guys. Yeah, hopefully you will have a nice SQL Bits, even it's virtual. I really miss the party, I have to say. Um, Maybe next year we see each other back alive somewhere in the world, maybe in England, maybe somewhere in Germany. I would appreciate that. And with this, don't forget to fill out any kind of evaluation forms that maybe are presented in the SQL Bits. And yeah, happy to see you again. Thank you very much. Bye bye.